te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the Red Cross tells us where it will spend your flood donations. Temporary villages could house flood victims. And a massive slip's taken out an essential rail line to Northland, and that means more trucks on fragile highways. We talked to Transport Minister Michael Wood about the pothole-laden road ahead. Even hiking's off, with one great walk closed due to cyclone damage. Muriwai residents want to know if they can ever go home. They're meeting with officials in the next hour. It's bye-bye Judy. Kia ora, Kevin. Vanuatu prepares for its second cyclone in 24 hours. And the octogenarian who basically stalks sea lions, in a lovely way that is, she's even got one named after her. Don't forget, watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. More than 2 weeks after Cyclone Gabrielle struck, it's still unclear how many people have been made homeless in Hawke's Bay. Government figures show just 128 households in the region have applied to the temporary accommodation service since it became available on Monday. But almost 1,000 homes have been red or yellow stickered. The Housing Minister, Megan Woods, says that's because many people are still in immediate clean-up mode.
There's a lot of people that are staying with friends and family that probably won't do that for the period of time that it might require for their house to be repaired. So what I'm really urging anyone to do is to come forward, to register with the Temporary Accommodation Service so we really can start to build that picture for the recovery.
Megan Woods says they're considering temporary villages and housing that can fulfil a permanent purpose after they've been used as a temporary solution. Almost 900 households in Auckland and 63 in Tairāwhiti have applied for temporary housing. Waka Kotahi says installing temporary bridges in some difficult locations in Hawke's Bay may take 2 to 3 months. 3 so-called Bailey bridges have already been built for locations in Auckland, Te Puke and Wairoa, while work has begun on another 3 at other locations. The agency's Hawke's Bay recovery spokesperson, Mark Owen, says some temporary bridges will take longer than others to install.
Typically it takes about 2 months depending on the location and the complexity of the site, so that's broadly 2 to 3 months, but if things go well we hope that we can do it quicker. Obviously everything is subject to weather, and I'm sure you've seen the impacts of ongoing rain. It makes things even harder and challenging, but we're absolutely committed in getting that restored in as quick a time as possible.
Mark Owen says there are about 20 damaged bridges in Hawke's Bay alone. A massive slip has closed the main railway freight line between Auckland and Northland. The North Auckland line between Swanston and Whangarei was damaged by slips and washouts during Cyclone Gabrielle. Kiwi Rail expects it to be closed for 10 to 12 weeks. The storm triggered about 50 slips onto the rail line, the largest dumping 35,000 cubic metres across the track between Helensville and Wellsford. Kiwi Rail Chief Operations Officer Siva Sivapakiam says temporary earthworks are needed to first clear the slip, followed by permanent earthworks and significant drainage improvements before reopening. Meanwhile, a big slip is threatening power lines and towers that supply most of Northland. The national grid operator is warning of an increased risk of cuts while they do emergency work on 2 transmission towers south of Wellsford. Transpower expects the work to take about a week. State Highway 2 north of Gisborne is closed again due to a slip between Matawai and Puha. Waka Kotahi says there's no detour available for the important link between Opotiki and Bay of Plenty and both Gisborne and Wairoa. Ousted Public Service Chair Rob Campbell says his removal from the Environmental Protection Authority and Te Whatu Order is Muldoonism in action. Mr Campbell has been sacked from the EPA and Te Whatu Order after the ministers responsible lost confidence he was able to act impartially. But he alleges he was removed because of his strong support for co-governance, comparing the experience to when he was called a communist and dangerous subversive by former Prime Minister Robert Muldoon.
It was a very chilling experience for me, and in those days that was a very damning thing to be said about you. The way I feel about this is exactly the same way. This feels to me like Muldoonism in action.
Rob Campbell says it's too early to have regrets, but says both agencies were dear to his heart. In sport, there's a log jam at the top of the New Zealand Open leaderboard late on day one of the golf tournament in Arrowtown. A short time ago, 6 players were tied for first place on 6 under par. 2 New Zealanders, Kit Bittle and Steve Alker, are among the leaders. Tournament favourite Alker, who carded 7 birdies and a bogey, gave his round a pass mark.
Felt like it just left a little bit out there because it wasn't much wind today. I didn't get the par 5s on my back nine, a bit disappointing, but overall the score was good. I just kept my nose clean most of the day. I think I had a 3-putt in there, but apart from that it was pretty good.
Meanwhile, Lydia Ko has teed off at the Women's World Championship in Singapore and is 1 under after 7 holes, 3 shots behind the leader. And the Crusaders coach, Scott Robertson, insists the drama surrounding the appointment of the next All Blacks coach isn't a distraction for him or his side. New Zealand Rugby has announced they'll name the next All Blacks boss within 6 weeks, with current coach Ian Foster subsequently ruling himself out, leaving Robertson and Jamie Joseph as the leading contenders to take over the side following this year's World Cup. The defending champion Crusaders were upset by the Chiefs in last week's Super Rugby opener in Christchurch, but Robertson denies he or his team have been affected by the All Blacks coaching saga.
I've got a job to do and a job to finish here, so that's my clear focus, and I just come in with the same energy every day, and you can look into it what you want, but I'm on here.
The Crusaders play the Highlanders in Melbourne tomorrow night, with all teams playing in the city this weekend. That's the news.
Put down your phone and pick up a Swede. TikTok glued me to it, and it was just mindless scrolling.
It is, but it's very hard not to put it back on. This is my experience.
Yeah, well, you eat some more Swedes and you'll see your life will be changed.
The Swedes will.
Swede, a delicious boast of nutrition.
Good nutritional value. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy periods with patchy drizzle possible through to tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island, generally fine with areas of morning cloud or fog tomorrow. Isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. Some heavy tomorrow with possible thunderstorms about Taupo, Taihape and the Hawke's Bay Ranges. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers in Fiordland turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Scattered showers elsewhere, clearing this evening, then returning tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine with isolated afternoon or evening showers inland. Showers spreading to the Canterbury and Marlborough coasts tomorrow afternoon and evening with some heavy falls possible. Otago and Southland mainly fine, but the odd shower about Dakiura, Stewart Island today. Scattered rain or showers spreading north later tomorrow. Chatham Islands mostly cloudy, a few light showers tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5. I will have news headlines and any traffic news for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The destruction brought by Cyclone Gabrielle has destroyed homes, businesses and infrastructure across the North Island. The recovery is set to cost billions, and in some cases the damage caused will take years to repair and to recover. In the aftermath, millions has been given to the Red Cross, and today they've been working out how to spend the money that's been pouring in over the last 3 weeks. Well, joining me now is the Secretary-General of the New Zealand Red Cross, Sarah Stewart-Black. Kia ora, Sarah.
Kia ora.
So how much has been pledged and how much has actually arrived?
So at this stage, we know we have $10 million and we know that there is money still coming in to support those affected by the severe weather and the cyclone.
So that $10 million is already in your account, it's not just pledges?
No, not just pledges.
Okay, so what are you doing with the money and have you started to spend it?
We started before the fund was even established, and of course since the fund has been established, we were swift to continue to provide immediate support on the ground to those affected. Would it be helpful to give some examples of some of the things just in the last week we've been doing?
Yeah, tell us.
So combination of generators, fuel, VHF radios, satellite phones, bedding, first aid kits, clean-up kits, as well as dehumidifiers as well. So that gives a bit of an example of some of those immediate needs beyond when it was still raining. And of course, we've had 3 weather events over this last month. So we've seen people not only be evacuated just once, but many times. And so part of our consideration has been, how do we make best use of this money to be able to support those affected? So we've done it into 3 programs of activity. The first one is response and early recovery. So that's that kind of equipment and resources that are emerging needs happening right now, today, tomorrow, next week, next month. And we're able to move really quickly on those. Already to date, we've spent over $600,000 just on the needs in the last week. The second area is partnerships. So what we're really conscious of is not wanting to duplicate effort or find we're dealing with issues that actually were last week and not the current issues, but also making sure there's enough robustness around where this money goes from the generosity of New Zealanders. So we're working with others where it makes sense that they already have things up and running, and this money can help.
So Sarah, we'll talk about these in more detail, but just give us the third one. So response, partnership, and the third category you were talking about?
The third one is investment, and that's about looking at what are the things that will take a bit longer to work through so that we're supporting communities for when future emergencies happen. But right now we know the emphasis needs to be on immediate and short-term needs.
Okay, so if we can go back to some of that, the list you gave of the generators, the fuel, the VHS, the bedding,
Yes.
and the money already spent, about $600,000. You started spending money before the donations come in. So do you just take that off the money that's come into the account?
No, we're not including the money that, the cost of actually having our people deployed in those initial days. This is about saying what's committed out of the fund so far is just over $600,000, and that's just in the last week. So we wanted to be able to start spending the money as soon as we can because we could see those needs emerging out of the affected communities.
Right. So how do people get money? Is there a set criteria? Do organisations apply, or do you just decide yourselves?
So there's a combination of things. One of the areas we're working through at the moment is the most efficient way to get money into those that are facing real hardship or where there is huge vulnerability. And the mayoral disaster relief funds that in many cases are either set up or are in the process of being set up have a set of criteria and an application process. And we're working with the mayors and their teams in local government to understand what the scale of need is and whether this is the fastest way to get money out to those individuals.
So you mean transferring some of the funds to mayoral funds?
Yes, in order to meet specific requirements that it's set out in our fund. So we said what the purpose of the fund was, and in making sure that it would actually be able to support not just individuals but needs on the ground, which could be, groups of people or whole communities that are impacted.
Right.
And on top of that, we are looking at what organisations are on the ground where, rather than duplicate that effort, we can actually enable them to keep doing what they're doing. So examples of that might be, we know that there are food parcels still being provided every single day to families who need it. So are there some of those mechanisms where, in fact, they're drawing down on resources and they'll end up having to stop that service without more money? We might be able to provide additional support so that they can just keep on doing it rather than us set up something in addition to that.
So the mayoral fund, Sarah, if you decide to put money into those, will you evenly distribute it to each of the mayoral funds, or is it a needs assessment? One mayoral fund may get more.
I think it's a combination of trying to understand where each of those funds are up to, how much money they already have in them, and what's the quantum of need on the ground. So we're currently doing those conversations now. So I'm not in a position to say, well, we're just going to give a standard amount to everyone. But I think it's more nuanced than that, because the scale of damage and where the need is likely to be different. That's what I'm anticipating. So we want to make sure that we're able to take account of those nuances.
So, Sarah, when you say we, who will make those decisions? Is it a committee within the Red Cross? Who is on it? Is there any representation from the community? Who decides who gets the money?
So this is a special appeal, which under New Zealand Red Cross means that there's no administrative charge or any costs that remove money away from the community affected. It means that New Zealand Red Cross absorbs those costs so that for every dollar that's donated, it goes directly to the community affected. Now, there's a kind of internal process that we have around how the rules of this work so that we can be really transparent. So it's all reported through our annual reports and those processes. To make sure we had the right kind of assurance for our board, but also for those that have given money and for the public that are affected, we've got a special appeals working group that includes an independent person who used to sit on our foundation that is providing advice in around the criteria that we're applying for decision making. And we've got thresholds of investment where above a particular amount, it actually needs a decision from our board. We're doing this in a way
Above what amount, Sarah, will it need to go to the board for a decision?
So above $750,000, I need to take it to the board. Above $250,000, I need endorsement from our national president. And below $250,000, I'm able to make those judgment calls around the criteria that the fund set out, what it would be used for, on the advice of that special working group with the independent member on it.
So you keep not a cent of the money that is donated of those?
That is correct.
Right, zero, nothing
Zero.
for admin, nothing. Okay.
Zero.
All right. So in terms of dispersing the money, have you made a decision, because you've identified individual needs and collective needs, community projects, have you decided what the split will be of the distribution of that money?
We're looking at the majority of it being spent across that response and early recovery and the partnerships areas, and doing that as quickly as we practically can, whilst making sure that we're doing our due diligence along the way. So as an example, we've got psychosocial first aid training for civil defence emergency management, council and health personnel being rolled out from today to help them support clients or members of the public that are already affected from this emergency, be able to support them with the level of distress that they are already experiencing. So in the next week, we'll have trained up 100 people, 100 staff to do that. Now, that means we're able to move fast. We're able to make those kind of decisions where it makes just good practical sense, rather than actually slowing the process down and finding that there are delays into that community.
We're almost out of time, Sarah, but I just want a couple of quick answers that people will be curious about. In terms of transparency, do they have to wait for an annual report, or are you going to have some kind of rolling disclosure where people can see, OK, Red Cross has spent 2 of the 10 million and this is what it's gone on?
Yes, we're going to provide regular reporting publicly on what the money's being spent on and being able to provide those updates both for those that have been impacted on the ground, but those who actually have been incredibly generous.
Sarah? How regularly are you going to post
We're
it?
looking at least fortnightly to start with. It may even be more frequently than that. We're just working that through.
OK, and of the 10 million or so that you've got, have you actually spent a cent of that money yet?
Yes, so just over $600,000.
That's 600. Yeah, has come from that. All right.
That's correct.
Really appreciate your time, Sarah. Thank you for joining us. That is Sarah Stewart-Black, who is the Red Cross's Secretary-General there, talking about how they are going to distribute the funds that have been donated. 2101 on text, if you've got any thoughts on that, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Temporary villages could go up in Hawke's Bay to help house up to 1,000 people displaced by Cyclone Gabrielle. Housing Minister Megan Woods was on the ground today to get a feel for how desperate the need is in a region already burdened by a housing shortage. While some residents have found a roof over their heads in the interim, others haven't been so lucky. Our reporter Lauren Crimp spoke to some of them.
I miss it. It's my home. And even though we're staying elsewhere, it's not my place. My soul's here.
Danelle Kendrick and her whānau are one of many in their Eskdale community and in the region torn away from the place they love. She counts herself lucky.
We're just currently in Napier Town, and we've been put in emergency housing through my husband's work. There's 15 other families that have lost their homes that have been put in, some of them too. So we're very, very lucky that we've been able to have that, as I know lots of other people are still trying to find homes, and that makes me feel guilty, but I needed that for my kids. I needed a house for them, so yeah.
Their displacement insurance will cover a slice of the rent, but the rest will stack up on top of the mortgage and rates for their destroyed home. Across Napier, Hastings and Central Hawke's Bay, council figures show 84 homes have been red-stickered and 884 yellow-stickered, with some yet to be assessed, especially in isolated rural communities. Many are turning to social media to find somewhere to live, and social services report some are staying with friends and family, at marae, in campgrounds and in caravans and garages. Chance Wharekawa and his partner Melissa have been staying in various caravans offered up by friends. They're grateful but anxious.
Yeah, been a bit rough. Just moving, not having a stable situation. What we got right now is definitely good, but it's not what we had or what we lost.
Melissa says they have no idea what comes next.
At the moment, we're looking at houses to rent.
Is there much around?
Not really, no. Housing crisis, so definitely not.
On their to-do list today was to register with the government's temporary accommodation service. Government figures show only 128 Hawke's Bay households have applied since it became available on Monday, despite almost 1,000 being displaced. Housing Minister Megan Woods says that's because for many, it's still too early, so they still don't know the size of the job they've got ahead.
We don't know at the moment. There's a lot of people that are staying with friends and family that probably won't do that for the period of time that it might require for their house to be repaired. So what I'm really urging anyone to do is to come forward, to register with the temporary accommodation service, so we really can start to build that picture for the recovery of what the demand's going to look like.
But along with councils, iwi and community groups, they're prepping for big numbers, considering temporary villages and housing that can fulfil a permanent purpose once it's done its dash as a temporary solution. If there is a silver lining, Megan Woods says government has earmarked land in Hawke's Bay that's ready to build on, meant for a program designed to curb the housing crisis that already existed.
Homai Ofakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch. The Red Cross says they've got about $10 million in Cyclone Gabrielle donations that are going to be distributed in the communities affected. Let us know what you think of their plan. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. What would you like it to go on? It is time for us to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Housing Minister Megan Woods says Hawke's Bay residents displaced by Cyclone Gabrielle should register with the temporary accommodation service, even if they're still staying with friends or whānau, so it's possible to build a picture of what's needed for recovery. Almost 1,000 homes have been red or yellow stickered. Just 128 households in the region have applied to the service since it became available on Monday. The Secretary-General of the New Zealand Red Cross says New Zealanders have given $10 million to its Cyclone Gabrielle Emergency Fund, and there's still more coming in. Sarah Stewart-Black told Checkpoint that so far $600,000 has been spent to provide people with immediate help on things like generators, fuel and bedding. Already battered Vanuatu is bracing for its second cyclone in 24 hours. Cyclone Kevin is currently Category 1, but the Fiji Met Service says it's forecast to intensify to a Category 2 tonight when it hits Vanuatu. Kiwi Rail says Northland's main rail network could be closed for up to 3 months after a major slip brought down about 35,000 cubic metres of debris to the section of the line between Helensville and Wellsford. Kiwi Rail Chief Operations Officer Siva Sivapakiam told Checkpoint that works to repair the line will begin this week. And the sacked Public Service Chair, Rob Campbell, has described his removal from the Environmental Protection Authority and Te Whatu Order as Muldoonism in action. Mr Campbell was removed from the roles after he criticised National's water infrastructure policy on LinkedIn. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, State Highway 2 north of Gisborne is closed again due to a slip. The inland section of road between Muriwai and Puha is affected, and Wakakotahi says there's no detour available for the highway, which is an important link between Opotiki and the Bay of Plenty and both Gisborne and Wairoa. So the following roads remain closed following Cyclone Gabrielle. State Highway 2, Muriwai to Puha and Napier to Wairoa. State Highway 5, Eskdale to Taupō. State Highway 35, Te Puia Springs to Tolaga Bay, and State Highway 38, Wairoa to Lake Waikaremoana. I will have more news headlines and any other traffic news for you at 20 to 6.
Kia ora rā iho. After a 3-year absence, the New Zealand Golf Open is back with record prize money up for grabs. The tournament at Millbrook Resort in Arrowtown has a field of 156 professionals and 156 amateurs, the most amateurs to play in the 102-year-old history of the event. Tournament favourite Steve Alker is aiming to be the first New Zealander to win the Open since Michael Hendry in 2017, and we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, catch us up, Felicity. What's been happening today?
It's a little bit of time to go in Arrowtown, but as I sat down here, there'd been a little bit of action late in the day, but there is actually no clear leader. We've got 7 players tied for first at 6 under. Amongst that group, there are 2 New Zealanders, Kit Brittle and Steve Alker, as you mentioned there. Alker hasn't been back at this tournament in 4 years. So his return, we might remember last year he won the PGA Champions Tour. So he's coming back with a bit of a fatter wallet and a lot more attention on what he can do. He hasn't actually won this tournament before. He did well as an amateur, but he wants to lift it for the first time. And so he also, at 51 years old, he's trying to become the oldest winner of this tournament. He's playing with a bit of a heavy heart this week, though, as well. His caddy passed away last month, and that was from cancer, just a week after he'd been diagnosed with liver cancer. So Steve is saying this week he's dedicating the tournament to him, and he's had a good start. As you probably heard in the news earlier, he was reasonably happy with that opening round. 7 birdies and a bogey, so not too bad. That other New Zealander, Kit Brittle, we might not know as much about him. He's a 24-year-old Aucklander, and he doesn't actually have a profile in the New Zealand Open tournament website, so maybe they weren't expecting him to be in the mix so early in this tournament either. But he did miss an opportunity on the 18th to putt a short putt. He could have taken an outright lead, so maybe a little bit even more disappointment for him after today's first round.
OK, well, some of the New Zealand players you might expected to see at this tournament, they're missing. Where are they? Well,
that's right. New Zealand's top 2 men's players, Ryan Fox and Danny Lee, aren't here. So Danny Lee recently signed with Live Golf. He hasn't played here since 2009. And so on the eve of the tournament director, Michael Gladding, said that, he doesn't really expect to see him back anytime soon. He's not somebody who has shown an interest in playing in this tournament. At the opposite end of that, we've got Ryan Fox, who is a very big supporter of the New Zealand Open, and he's actually got a clash tomorrow. He tees off tomorrow, very early tomorrow morning at the Arnold Palmer tournament in Florida. So that's one of the first big PGA Tour events that he'll get to compete in this year, because he's now a top 50 player.
Yeah.
So he'll also get to the Masters next month as well.
Great, Felicity. Thank you for that. That's sports reporter Felicity Reid. More than 40 extra freight trucks per day will be on the already fragile roads of Northland after a major slip on the region's main rail network. The North Auckland line between Swanson and Whangarei is expected to be closed for months, stopping all rail freight services to and from Northland. Our reporter Haisa Almeida went to see the damage.
The slip brought down about 35,000 cubic metres of debris to the section of the line between Helensville and Wellsford, nearly 3 times as big as a rugby field. The North Auckland line between Swanson and Whangarei is one of the main routes for dairy products and cement to the rest of the country. Kiwi Rail Chief Operations Officer Siva Sivapakian says fixing the line might take up to 3 months, weather dependent.
It's going to be quite challenging because one of the first things we really want to do is build back the rail track, because it's one of the lifeline connections for us to move freight in and out of Northland. So 10 to 10 weeks is going to be pretty challenging for us, and today is probably the first day we got in there.
Kiwi Rail upgraded the North Auckland line between Swanson and Whangarei in 2020 to make the track more secure. Siva Sivapakian says with the slips, the project will now have to start again from scratch.
At the moment, we haven't been moving a hell of a lot because the line has been upgraded, and we started our first train on the 27th of January. And with what's happened, we've now gone back to square one.
With the slip, more than 20 containers that use rail will have to go by truck. Rail and Maritime Transport Union spokesperson Todd Fauster says that could mean more stress to the already fragile roading system in Northland.
Normally there's one train a day, and the goods are mainly coming towards Auckland. The goods now have to be moved by truck, but there are big challenges with the roads as well, not just rail. And you're looking potentially 24 to 48 trucks a day.
Transporting New Zealand Chief Executive Nick Leggett agrees and says having the rail freight line out of action will have a significant effect on the roads.
What goes on a train still has to be transported, and then will have to go on the back of a truck. So it will mean more trucking movements.
Fonterra is one of the companies that relies on the North Auckland line and says it has switched its product transporting from rail to road. Director Global Supply Chain Anna Palaret says using trucks as an alternative to trains is less efficient and more carbon intensive. Kiwi Rail says works to repair the road and rail line will begin this week and will include building a temporary earth bund to make the site safe before beginning to remove the slip. It says it's working on a long-term engineering solution to avoid further slips.
It is 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is, of course, time for the business news. Ko taka hoa ai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me live in the studio to talk all things business. Let's start with Push Pay. Right, this is the donations company, church based one. It's in a trading halt. What's the deal?
Yeah, it's been in a trading halt for a while. It's got a special meeting tomorrow for shareholders to decide whether or not they want to accept a takeover offer. We've been talking about for this company. It's a $1.5 billion offer. The offer has been made by some shareholders, institutional shareholders that own about 20% of the company already. So for this takeover deal to go forward, they need to get 75% of the remaining shareholders to support it. And at this stage, they only have, looks like 56%. So that's not going to be enough to make this offer go through. So at this stage, doesn't look like it's going to happen for the company. I guess they'll learn more tomorrow. But for now, we're looking at a trading halt for Push Pay while the shareholders decide whether or not they want that offer. But it doesn't look like they do.
Ratings agency Standard & Poor's says it still doesn't have enough information to forecast how Three Waters, the reforms, would affect debt and costs carried by local councils. I mean, what does it need in order to make that assessment?
Well, it needs some really basic information. Like, for example, it needs to know the value of the assets that are being considered. So the government wants to transfer these assets from local governments to a centralized body. But to do that, for Standard & Poor's to decide how that's going to shake out through ratings. So the ratings agency, it's basically a credit rating. Anybody would get a credit rating if you go to the bank to borrow money. Some people have really good credit ratings, others not so much. So it's the same with councils, depending on how much debt they have, how much income, and so forth. All right, so they need to know what the value of the assets held by the councils are right now that are being transferred. They don't know. Then they need to know what are the decisions that will be made around it. For example, will the government cover all the debt that's still owed on those water assets? And if so, when would that money, the debt that they owe, be paid back by whoever ends up buying owning these assets? It's pretty complicated. And S&P just don't have the answers. So they've been looking at this for a while. Last year, they were hoping they would get enough information when the bill came to the Parliament. That was going to be in November. Didn't happen. I mean, the bill did, but not the detail. And they still don't have it. They know it's there. They just can't access it, nor can anyone else. That's kind of confusing, considering that's a piece of legislation that's moving forward. So S&P are only guessing at this stage, based on their, informed information. This is a big rating agency, so they do already have a sense. They're basically saying that from what they can tell, based on a number of assumptions, there's going to be some winners, there's going to be some losers. Amongst the winners, top of the list is Palmerston North, bottom of the list, Whangarei.
Interesting. Okay, what's been going on in the markets, please, Nona?
Right, so the top 50 index, it rose 0.2% today. That was a gain to 11,901. And the New Zealand dollar also, it was a funny day. It was stronger earlier. It's lost a little bit of its steam. It's at 62.3 US cents, slightly better than yesterday. 92.4 Australian, 51.9 pence. And again, Asian markets are a bit sluggish. Still, there's this fixation on what the US are going to do with interest rates.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier with business news there. Already battered Vanuatu is bracing for its second cyclone in 24 hours. Tropical Cyclone Judy hit parts of Vanuatu as a Category 4 system, but it's dissipated as it moves away and has been downgraded to a Category 2. But as Lydia Lewis reports, there's more on the way.
Right behind Judy is Kevin. That's 2 cyclones in 2 days, lashing the island nation. Fiji Met Service tropical cyclone forecaster Stephen Macke says Kevin is forecast to intensify to a Category 2. He says damaging gale force winds are expected to be felt from tonight.
It could even go further to a Category 3. For now, we are maintaining it as a Category 2. We expect a lot of rain, severe flooding for flood-prone areas, well as we're expecting around 6 to 8 meter waves and even up to 10 meters.
Pentecost, Santo and Malekula have been issued warnings in anticipation of Kevin. Vanuatu's southern islands of Tana and Eromango remain completely cut off. On the main island,
Well, I mean, there's a lot of damage on Efare as well.
Prime Minister Ishmael Kalsakal says police and the National Disaster Management Committee have been desperately trying to get connectivity up and running. Power's been off for hours in parts as crews work at breakneck speed to get the grid back in shape.
Because they've been down and they've been problematic the whole day yesterday and even to parts of this morning. The management committee's been meeting full on since yesterday and the police are involved in clearing and making sure that the lines are up and the water supply is back to the houses, but I'll try my best to communicate with Eromango, but it's impossible at the moment.
On a positive note, Prime Minister Kalsakal says a medic vessel arrived at Eromango ahead of the storm.
There's a surgeon in there they're visiting the islands and they've got people there ready to deal with emergency issues.
I called all of the businesses with public phone numbers on the southern islands, more than 20 of them. All of the lines were eerily silent. I got through to Greg Watt, a Kiwi who is the manager of Vanuatu Traveller and Tana Adventures. He is currently in Aotearoa and has been working with communities in Tana for the last 15 years with his wife. They've heard nothing from the people and communities they love.
Today is going to be the worst day for them.
While he waits, he is having flashbacks of Cyclone Pam, which tore up Tana in 2015.
When I got there was 90% of all the homes were wiped out. 90% of all their crops and food were wiped out. A population on the whole island being close to starvation. And they were essentially scraping out the rotting vegetation out of the ground to feed. I fear that a similar situation will arise.
Mr. Watt hopes lessons were learnt from Pam and the families he holds dear to his heart in the Southern Islands make it through the wrath of Kevin.
It is 27 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And keep your feedback coming. Homai o whakaaro. We're always interested in your thoughts. Some of it already in here. A lot of you are commenting on our interview with the Red Cross. They're obviously taking donations related to Cyclone Gabrielle. $10 million that's going to be spent. And we were talking to them about how it's going to be spent and who is going to decide. This person says New Zealand Red Cross spending only $600K in a week is ridiculously inadequate in relation to the level of need in some communities, and with $10 million in the bank. The focus on not wanting to double up is just an administrative roadblock to getting what is needed to those who need it. Red Cross should be in each community talking to leaders there, seeing for themselves and getting what is required ASAP. Support communities directly. Another person says, thank goodness for the Red Cross, 100% of the funds being applied to the cause in question. This is just about the only charity I have confidence in because of this undertaking and the procedures in place. Well done, Red Cross. And Tom has got in touch to say, thanks for the interview with Red Cross. I had some concerns, but much relieved now. A number of you were asking what percentage of the donations is going to administration staff marketing. Well, we were told 0. It is all going to the actual recovery and relief in those communities affected by the cyclone. Another says it's reassuring that they will report publicly, but do they have a timeline or schedule for the aid? Is there modelling or an estimate? They said they were going to do fortnightly reports to start off with, so we'll keep our eyes open for them. Do text us your feedback on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
More than 2 weeks after Cyclone Gabrielle struck, it's still unclear how many people have been made homeless in Hawke's Bay. Government figures show just 128 households in the region have applied to the temporary accommodation service since it became available on Monday, but almost 1,000 homes have been red or yellow stickered. In Auckland, nearly 900 households have applied for temporary housing, and in Tairāwhiti, 63 have applied. The Secretary-General of the New Zealand Red Cross says at least $10 million has been donated to support those affected by Cyclone Gabrielle. Sarah Stewart-Black told Checkpoint that the Red Cross is dividing its support into 3 categories: response, partnership and investment. More heavy trucks will be plying the fragile roads of Northland after a major slip closed the region's main railway freight line. Kiwi Rail expects the line to be closed for 10 to 12 weeks. Transporting New Zealand Chief Executive Nick Leggett told Checkpoint that trucks will be able to pick up the slack, but he says the challenge is many of Northland's roads have been affected by the cyclone as well. And time-lapse video of last year's NASA mission to change the course of an asteroid by smashing into it with a spacecraft was surprisingly successful. The footage shows that when the probe, travelling at 6 kilometres a second, collided with the asteroid, it caused the space rock to speed up its orbit 4 times more than predicted. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the main centres around the country, it looks like everything is moving normally for commuters. Meanwhile, news came through earlier this afternoon that State Highway 2 north of Gisborne is closed because of a slip. There's currently no detour for that main route at the moment between Opotski and Gisborne and Wairoa. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Nā mihi iwi. Gabrielle has stopped Waikaremoana hikers in their tracks. The Great Walk is closed completely due to cyclone damage. Te Urewera and its roads took a hammering during the recent foul weather. And the walk's been on again, off again over the past few years, closed by COVID, controversy over maintenance and moves to replace old dock huts. Te Uru Taumatua looks after Te Urewera for Tūhoi. Ko taku manuhiri inai ko Tamati Kruger. Tamati is the chair of TUT and joins us now. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Lisa.
What's the extent of the damage there?
Well, it's very concerning to us. The lake levels currently are around 30% higher than the average operating range by Genesis. So we've had an additional, 225 millimetres of rain since the cyclone, and so there's still, lake levels is still rising higher. All 4 of the huts at Waikaremoana Great Walk are closed, including all the shelters. Most of the toilets and all of the boat sewage dump sites are not operable. Our low-level bridges, culverts and boardwalks are still flooded. We can't get in to do an assessment on what work needs to be done, and hundreds of metres of tracks we can't assess because it's all underwater. There's been significant undercutting of sections of the track, mainly because of lake levels and wave action. So the Great Walk really, we really need to take at least 2 weeks for the lake levels to be low enough for us to do some really quantifiable inspection for the damage and unlock what resources are needed for repairs.
Hey, you mentioned the lake levels there and wave action. Can you explain that to us? Do you think there's too much water being held by the power company?
Yep, that is right. We can't get in to do proper inspections because of that high lake levels. As I said, it's 30% higher than the maximum lake level operating range by Genesis. It's 30% higher than what it should be.
So, are you suggesting they should do something about that?
I would love them to do something about that.
What?
Lower it.
And would that do harm somewhere else?
I don't know, and I think that's a really good conversation to have with what is the impact down from Waikaremoana to the Wairua communities. Look, we would have loved to have had a forum 20 years ago between ourselves and Genesis with the community, so we could prepare ourselves for such events. I don't have any information for you around what are the impacts from south of Lake Waikaremoana, but I can confirm that the trouble and the disturbance and the effects at Waikaremoana are directly caused by the high lake levels.
Are you talking to Genesis?
I would love to talk to Genesis. We do not have a relationship with Genesis. I would say to you that Genesis is indifferent to Tūhoe. They are apathetic towards having a relationship with Tūhoe.
So you say a couple of weeks before you can actually fully assess the damage. Then the question is, how long before you can do the repairs, and do you have the resources and the money to do it?
Yeah, that's true, yes. That is what we need to do. And as I've said, it will take at least 2 weeks for the lake levels to be low enough for us to do that inspection. And then we then have to find the resources to repair the damage that allow New Zealand public back inside to enjoy the Great Walk.
Are you going to have to ask for some money from the government, additional funding?
We have a habit of not wanting to do that, mainly because we get ourselves trapped in conditional funding from the government. We will certainly talk with DOC around what we can do together, first of all, for that, to see what we can do between us. But the instinct of Tūhoe is to be as independent as we can from dependency on the Crown.
So, Tamati, just quickly before you go, what are you telling people then who may have this walk in their sights and think they're coming through on, Easter, say? No show?
Yeah, I'm hurtful for them that their plans, their travel plans, their holiday plans with their family for Easter weekend, they will have to put that off. There's no way that we can repair what damage there is on the Great Walk. And added to that is the recent slips really from the roads of access between Rotorua and Waikaremoana, Wairoa to Waikaremoana. It's too risky, I think, for the public to use those roads. The integrity of bridges and the slips on the road it'll have to be at least extreme caution to use the road.
Too dangerous. Understand.
Yes.
Really appreciate your time, Tamati. Thank you for joining us. Ngā mihi, that's Tamati Kruger there, the chair of Te Uru Taumatua, who looks after Te Uruwera for Tūhoi. It is 13 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Muriwai residents who have been out of their homes for 2 weeks are desperate to hear about progress. Nearly 200 homes were evacuated after Cyclone Gabrielle brought down landslides, and since then, some residents haven't been able to return. They're gathering at the local golf course, hoping to hear more on the fate of their properties. And at the meeting, there is Tom Taylor. Tom, who is speaking to residents tonight?
Kia ora, Lisa. It's quite surreal, first of all, just being down here past a cordon which is in place. There is a very strict cordon at the top of Motutara Road and at the top of another road coming down to this valley by the beach here. So it's quite surreal being here. Just behind me, we've got one of the biggest slips to hit the town lit out here. And just seeing it up close really brings it to life, I think. But as for who we've got here tonight, we're just at the golf club here, so people are starting to gather into the club rooms as we speak. Last time I checked, there were probably about 150 people in there, but that's growing by the minute. And also, from what I've heard, a lot of people aren't actually able to make it tonight, so they'll be looking out for a stream to go up on the Auckland Emergency website at some point soon. So who we've got here, we've got the Civil Defence, we've got people from the Council, Emergency Management, we've got people from the police, we've even got a team of insurers from Vero who are coming here to try and answer any questions in that regard that residents may have.
Yeah, and what do the residents want?
From what I've been hearing here, it's just there's this massive sense of uncertainty. If we can all kind of think back to the COVID lockdowns of 2020, it's a similar kind of feeling that I'm getting from this, where it's not even so much people are just really wanting some certainty going forward, which would provide them with a little bit of solace through this time, even if it's bad news, is kind of the message that I'm getting. So even if their houses, even if they're not going to be able to re-enter their houses at all, they're just like those cold, hard facts in order to get on with their lives, basically. They're interested in what kind of process the council will be taking from here on in terms of what will happen to red or yellow or white stickered houses, or for the entire community down here, which is currently within this kind of red blanket. What's going to happen to them? Are they going to get reassessed, or are they just going to remain in this kind of red zone forever? Other residents are interested in when they can just get into their houses to get some belongings. Still some talk of pets being left in houses in this cordoned off zone, so some residents getting very worried about their welfare. Other residents are also interested in just what these stickers mean for their property value or for their mortgages going forward. They're interested to see whether these red stickers, which, let's remember, these are the product of very rapid assessments, sometimes done in less than 20 minutes, whether these kind of stickers are going to hang around and go onto their land information memoranda, which could then go on to affect their property value going forward.
Absolutely,
so there's lots
Tom.
of questions unanswered at this point.
Thank you, Tom. Tom Taylor is outside the golf course there in Muriwai, where residents are meeting with officials to get some of the answers to those questions that Tom was talking about. A year ago today, the 23-day occupation of Parliament by anti-mandate protesters came to its shocking and violent end. RNZ video journalist Angus Drever captured the dramatic moments as police moved in to break up the protest. In a new RNZ video documentary, Boiling Point, Angus, along with other eyewitnesses, tell the story of that final infamous day of rage and protest. This from Morning Report's Corin Dan, who is the narrator of Boiling Point.
Suddenly, I just see a police officer ripped to the ground and pulled right in amongst the protesters. And these guys just bear down on him, kicking him.
This was the moment camera operator Angus Drever realised March 2nd wasn't going to end well.
And I remember seeing him on the ground and just thinking, one bad hit to the back of his head and he's gone.
That violent incident over the road from Parliament on the morning of March 2nd, just the first of many that would come that day. Neighbours like Ray Julian had watched on nervously as police moved in.
There were so many police, and they were everywhere, and they were organised.
But while many protesters remained peaceful,
It's not worth it. We're here in peace. It's not worth it.
there were also harder core groups clearly willing to take on police, leaving some like this man clearly worried about how the day would play out.
How do you think this might end? I'll be honest with you, I don't like to say it, but I think violently.
Sure enough, just hours later, the tinderbox that was the occupied Parliament lawn would explode. As police moved in to clear the lawn, tents and Parliament's playground were set ablaze.
There were multiple fires going at one point, and then the slide was on fire.
For RNZ reporters like Arnica Smith, the scene was chaotic and scary, with police now in the firing line.
It was really awful, actually, and there were people obviously really angry, wanting to throw stuff.
By mid-afternoon, Parliament would be cleared, but those protesters left out on the streets were not done.
Kia ora, Lisa. I'm at the intersection of Whitmore Street and Lambton Quay. For the last 5-10 minutes, teams of protesters have been running up to the concrete barricade here and hurling bricks.
Wellington Live reporter Graham Bloxham got caught up in the chaos.
I could not believe it. I walked into the middle of a riot. There was bricks flying over my head, water cannons coming back.
After a tense street battle, police would regain control and with the help of guns with sponge bullets, disperse the remaining protesters towards the Wellington railway station.
A big protest organiser van is leaving. They're out of here.
The occupation was then effectively over, but for those watching and covering events that day, there seemed little to celebrate.
I don't think anyone walked away from that riot feeling like a winner. There were a whole bunch of cops that were hurt. There were protesters who felt bereaved and left without getting what they wanted.
They're supposed to talk to us. We're a big part of New Zealand.
And there were people that were incredibly violent and are probably before the court now. So there really were no winners.
And you can watch Boiling Point by going to our website rnz.co.nz/Boiling Point, all one word. Now to Dunedin, where an octogenarian spends her days documenting one of the rarest sea lion species in the world and even has one named after her. Janet Ledingham wanders the shores and dunes around Otago Peninsula looking for New Zealand sea lions, often going out daily if the weather isn't bad. Tess Brunton joined her to go scouting for whakahau near Otipoti.
82-year-old Janet Ledingham says documenting sea lions fills her time no problem. She's a former medical researcher and says she's always had an interest in conservation, but her passion for sea lions started when she happened across a mum and her newly born pup at Waikaremoana near Otipoti in late December in 2015.
I got hooked then and there and followed them. We had to do a bit of babysitting because they were a bit vulnerable where they were at low tide with surfers and whatnot.
She describes herself as a nursemaid during their months in Waikaremoana. She visited and watched them regularly, recording their day-to-day lives. Her dedication was recognised with the Department of Conservation naming the pup after her, who has now had 3 pups of her own.
She's always been good with me. One of the Waikaremoana people reckons she always used to chase them. I said that was because he was getting too close with his camera. But if I find her now sleeping, she sort of opens one eye and says, "Oh, it's you," and
She regularly makes a trip along dusty roads to visit the sea lions on the Otago Peninsula. One of the locals lets her drive through their paddocks so she doesn't have to walk as far on the sand. Her car is well set up for her trips. She's got food, water, warm clothes, backup shoes, a walking pole and a few camera options. But it looks like you've got quite the setup here.
All the stuff I need, yes. One has to be prepared in this game.
We set off down a rocky path before reaching the inlet shore. It doesn't take long for her to spot some, relaxing on the sand.
The mum sitting up there looks like two of them. So they need like three of them. So it looks like may well be pups around as well.
The pups are usually born in the end of December and January, with their mums moving away from their birthing areas to inlets and other areas that offer them protection and less opportunity to be bothered by the much larger males. Further along, Janet points out a male with a few females, a pup and yearlings lying in the sand.
There were about 10 big fellas on Allen's Beach yesterday, and the word had got out, cover up today, and they'd all dug little holes and covered themselves in sand. One had pulled a piece of seaweed across, in fact giving himself a sun hat.
She takes plenty of photos and tries to identify the mums and the pups, mainly using their tag numbers and a reference list. This all gets typed up and sent to DOC and the New Zealand Sea Lion Trust. Jim 5, DOC's Coastal Otago Biodiversity Ranger, says it was a no-brainer to call a pup Janet after she spent so much time documenting its life.
We used to say little Janet and big Janet, but sort of as Janet the sea lion gets bigger, we've started saying human Janet and sea lion Janet.
He says her near-daily reports are extremely valuable, as she has a great eye for a photo and a story.
I think what Janet's doing is really great, and I only hope that when I'm in my 80s I can be out there doing just what Janet's doing now.
With years' worth of records and photos, Janet is hopeful she might turn them into a book.
Toe care, Janet. That is pretty awesome. Now, do go onto our website. So there's some really cute pictures of Janet, the sea lion spotter, and Janet the sea lion.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Paul Mardier, I'm Evie Ashton. At least $10 million has been donated to the Red Cross to help people hit by Cyclone Gabrielle. This week, the Red Cross has been supplying people in cyclone regions with generators, fuel, VHF radios, satellite phones, bedding, first aid kits, clean-up kits and dehumidifiers. Secretary-General Sarah Stewart-Black told Checkpoint more than $600,000 has been spent so far.
What we're really conscious of is not wanting to duplicate effort or find we're dealing with issues that actually were last week and not the current issues, but also making sure there's enough robustness around where this money goes from the generosity of New Zealanders.
Sarah Stewart-Black says the Red Cross will be reporting at least fortnightly on what the donated money is being spent on. The Cyclone Recovery Minister says areas of Hawke's Bay are being assessed to see if they're suitable to keep living in. Grant Robertson was in the region today, meeting with representatives of local government to begin conversations about the process of deciding where people can and can't live in the future. He says they're committed to making those decisions as quickly as possible.
One of the reasons we know that we have to move as quickly as we can on these matters is the uncertainty that people have. But there are multiple players involved. There is ourselves, the central government, there's local government, there's the banks, there's the insurers, and so we've got to bring all of those people together, make our assessments based on a principles basis and make our assessments based on what's really happening.
Grant Robertson says it's too early to talk specifics on which areas they're looking at. The number of people in Hawke's Bay registered with the government's temporary accommodation service has jumped from 32 to 128 since yesterday. The national manager of the service, Al Bruce, expects the number to grow since it was activated in Hawke's Bay on Monday. He says the service is working with local agencies and iwi to raise awareness of what it has to offer. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, 887 households were registered with the temporary accommodation service in Auckland, 15 in Northland, 11 in Waikato and 63 in Tairāwhiti. More heavy trucks will be plying Northland's fragile roads after slips closed the main freight rail line to Auckland. Cyclone Gabrielle triggered about 50 slips, the largest dumping 35,000 cubic metres across the railway line between Helensville and Wellsford. Transporting New Zealand represents more than 1,200 road freight companies. Its chief executive, Nick Leggett, says having the rail line out of action will have significant effects.
Trucks will be able to pick up the slack. The challenge, of course, will be that many roads in Northland have been compromised, and we just have to continue to keep the pressure on to ensure that the right roads are open.
Kiwi Rail expects the line to be closed for 10 to 12 weeks. A police health and safety charity says the government needs to do more to keep police officers safe. Today marks 1 year since the illegal anti-COVID-19 mandate occupation on Parliament's lawn. About 50 police officers were injured throughout the conflict, most of them during the riots on March the 2nd. Alistair Rose from the Blue Hope Foundation says these injuries come at a cost to officers, their families and the wider community. He says no one should get hurt at work and the government must do more, including funding more protective gear to support the well-being of police officers. The Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis says a committee of experts will investigate the causes of last night's rail disaster, the worst in Greece's living memory. At least 43 people, many of them young students, were killed when two trains collided. The BBC's Nick Beak is in Greece.
A station master in a nearby city has now been charged with manslaughter by negligence. And already the country's Prime Minister says tragic human error was to blame. But that has sparked anger overnight, including in the capital Athens, because for years there have been warnings the rail network was not safe. Visiting the wreckage, Greece's transport minister became emotional as he talked about the country's failing train network and later resigned. It's not known exactly how many passengers are missing, but many families now face an agonising wait.
And already battered Vanuatu is bracing for its second cyclone in 24 hours. Cyclone Judy hit parts of Vanuatu as a Category 4 cyclone yesterday, and Cyclone Kevin was named this morning. Cyclone Kevin is currently Category 1, but the Fiji Met Service says it's forecast to intensify to a Category 2 tonight when it hits Vanuatu. The forecaster says it has the potential to reach Category 3 with devastating effects. That's the news.
When the police decided to clear away protesters from an illegal occupation at Parliament, there was violence and rage. I'm Corin Dan, presenter of RNZ's new documentary, Boiling Point. A year on from the end of the occupation, we show new and shocking footage from that day. It's the first feature broadcast to provide a straightforward account of the final day of one of Aotearoa's most infamous protests. Watch the documentary now at rnz.co.nz/Boiling Point.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You're listening to RNZ National and you're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Kapiti and Wellington, cloudy periods with patchy drizzle possible through tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island, generally fine with areas of morning cloud or fog tomorrow. Isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. Some heavy tomorrow with possible thunderstorms about Taupo, Taihape and Hawke's Bay ranges. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Showers in Fiordland turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Scattered showers elsewhere, clearing this evening, then returning tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury. Mainly fine with isolated afternoon or evening showers inland. Showers spreading to the Canterbury and Marlborough coasts tomorrow afternoon and evening with some heavy falls possible. Otago and Southland mainly fine. The odd shower about the Stewart Island today. Scattered rain or showers spreading north later tomorrow. Chatham Islands mostly cloudy, a few light showers tomorrow. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Some flood-isolated communities could be weeks away from being reconnected with temporary bridges still in the design phase. The government's announced 3 so-called Bailey bridges that have already been built for locations in Auckland, Te Puke and Wairoa, but 3 more are to come with the east coast town of Tokomaru Bay and Hawke's Bay communities of Risington and Putorino and Tutera on the waiting list. Meanwhile, significant chunks of the state highway network remain out of action. A short time ago, I asked Transport Minister Michael Wood if we just need to completely rethink how to reconnect Aotearoa.
We're going to have to build back better in some of these areas in terms of our transport infrastructure and other core infrastructure. The period that we're in at the moment, though, is that the immediate focus needs to be on restoring basic connections to communities, businesses that are cut off. So that's where our focus is right at this point in time. We need to get those roads and those bridges open so that people, families, businesses can connect again. But as we move through that period, we're also doing the work to really understand where we might need to be putting additional investment in to make sure that our infrastructure is as resilient as possible.
But do you accept there are some things that we should just not bother rebuilding?
Well, that's something that we will have to carefully assess as we work through this process. And so, one of the things that was apparent to me as I drove around many of the roads here in Hawke's Bay today is that there might be some areas that previously there have been housing and businesses where it's possible there won't be in the future because of what people have experienced. If that's the case, we'll need to consider whether that is the right place to put roading investment in, when we might need to put more investment in other places. So that's something we'll carefully work through. We'll do that with communities and with the councils. But again, as I say, the immediate focus is simply on getting the core connections in place. That's what people here in the Hawke's Bay, the Coromandel and other areas need, and that's where we're putting most of our energy at the moment.
OK, so in terms of the small victories, 3 Bailey bridges in and 3 to come, right? I'm wondering how long the communities, those 3 communities waiting on temporary bridges, are going to have to wait to get them because they're pretty much cut off.
It's really tough for these communities, and I spoke to a number of people today who were able to speak directly to how that affected them, their families, their community life. And so we will work around the clock as much as we can to get that access restored to communities, whether it's bridges that need to be put in place or other types of transport infrastructure that have been washed out and cut off. We have a large number of roading crew who are out there at the moment doing everything that they can, and we're working very closely with the councils to prioritise our resources to make sure that we get those connections in place where it makes the biggest difference for people. So the message I'll just put out there for folks who are cut off at the moment is that getting you reconnected is our most important priority at the moment, and we're putting the resources in there to do that as soon as we can. Some of the damage is severe, and it will just take a little bit of time, but please bear with us. We're working as hard as we can.
Yeah, but can you give them a basic timeline? We're talking about Tokomaru Bay here, Risington, Tutera and Putorino, who are waiting on these Bailey bridges. Roughly, how long do you think before they get reconnected?
In each of those cases, it is likely to vary. And what we've confirmed with the Bailey bridges that we're putting in place today, and Risington is one of those ones, as you indicated, is that we have confirmed they're going ahead. Crews are heading out there. The way that the Bailey bridges are assembled is that the crews get there on site, they have an initial plan, and then they work through the best way of putting that in, given the local conditions.
But is it weeks or months, Minister, do you reckon?
In most of these cases, we are talking a period of weeks rather than a period of months. But I do just want to urge a little bit of caution there. It will depend on the local conditions. The crews are experts. They specialise in putting these bridges in place. They do work at pace, and they work as hard as they can to get those connections in place. And once we have real certainty about what we might be looking at in terms of dates, we will provide that to people. But I will just have to provide the assurance at this stage that everyone is working as hard as they can to move these bridges forward as quickly as we can.
You say you're looking at other options to connect communities, including diversions across private land. Where are you doing that?
There is a case where there is a diversion across private land that has been that we're working with the community on further up the coast, and there are potentially other places around some of the local road network. One of the things about the situation is that Waka Kotahi has primary responsibility for the state highway network, it's the councils who have responsibility for the local roading network. Some of that is still being assessed. So what we're saying there is that we will look at the range of options to make sure that we restore connectivity, and that is potentially one of them that can be useful.
State highway network in the mid to upper North Island is an absolute mess, isn't it, Minister? You can't go north from Auckland on the main highway. You can get stopped at the Bryn-Derwyns. You're having to use diversions and detours through Dargaville. A trip to Palmerston North, to Napier rather, you have to go through Palmerston North. You're talking about a 9-hour trip. I mean, are we open for business? Are we open for tourists? Are we open for visitors? Because we kind of don't look like it.
We've just experienced 2 devastating and unprecedented weather events, one after another, that have created an unprecedented level of disruption across the transport network. While there are real difficulties and some of those roads remain closed, what I would want people to understand is that we're making progress. Every few days we're getting more of these roads and these connections open. It is likely that before the end of this week, for example, we'll begin to restore access on State Highway 5 between Napier and Taupō. So we are making progress and it is heading in the right direction. And we need to send that message out there that, yes, New Zealand is open. We are experiencing a very, very difficult time. We are having to rebuild, but we want people to continue to come to our country. This remains a place that people can feel proud of, and we are going to help those communities to get reconnected in the coming weeks and months.
Rail to Northland is out now too, with a massive slip around Helensville. That means that hundreds of freight containers every week are now going to have to come between Auckland and Northland on road. Now that is more strain on smaller roads. What advice have you had about the impact of this? Are you worried about whether those roads can hold up?
Yes, we have 2 major impacts on the rail network, north of Auckland, as you've just described, but also Palmerston North to Napier and on to Wairoa, which I reviewed today. And both of those are going to take some time to restore. There has been an enormous quantity of land which has come down onto the rail north of Auckland, a number of significant underslips we are dealing with. It is a major job, but crews are out there working on those sites as we speak. The rough estimate we have is potentially around about 10 to 12 weeks for restoration of the rail network north of Auckland. In the meantime, we'll work closely with the road freight sector. It's still important that freight continues to get through between Auckland and Northland. That is the lifeblood of the region. It's not ideal. We want as much of that freight to be getting on rail as we possibly can. But in the meantime, that is how we will just need to manage it as our crews from Kiwi Rail get that important connection restored.
And that's Transport Minister Michael Wood there. It is almost 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Greece's Transport Minister has resigned after one of the country's worst ever rail disasters. At least 43 people have been killed and dozens more injured after a passenger train carrying some 350 people collided with the freight train as it emerged from a tunnel near the city of Larissa. The Prime Minister says the collision is due to tragic human error. Rescue teams are continuing to search for survivors, and the BBC's Nick Beek has this report.
The mangled remnants of a train bringing hundreds of students back from their holidays. Down the track, they're now grieving families who had waved them off. Greece's worst railway crash. It should never have happened. Earlier, they had worked through the night, recovering dozens of victims. Identification has been hard. The fire that broke out was intense. Survivors described the moment just before midnight their intercity service hit the freight train head-on.
We heard a big bang. Then it was 10 nightmarish seconds. We were turning over in the carriage. We fell on our sides and then it stopped and there was panic, cables everywhere and fire. The fire was immediate.
As it quickly became clear no one else would be found alive, news arrived that a signal master at the nearest city had been charged with manslaughter by negligence. He has blamed a possible technical failure. Greece's Prime Minister, visiting this carnage, vowed to find out what had gone so catastrophically wrong.
Our thoughts are with the victims' relatives. Our duty is to treat the injured and then to identify the bodies. I can guarantee only one thing. We will find out what caused this tragedy and will do whatever we can to avoid anything similar in the future.
This evening, Greece's transport minister resigned, saying his efforts to improve the railway hadn't been enough to prevent such an accident. But who is to blame is not a straightforward question. Many feel, though, this was a disaster waiting to happen.
Multiple interest rate rises and high inflation are beginning to bite on the Australian economy. Official figures show the economy grew by just 0.5% in the final 3 months of last year. While inflation might have peaked, small business owners and families are still anxious about the cost of living. The ABC's Catherine Gregory reports.
As Bill Toscas closes up his cafe for the day in Sydney's southeast, he's not too optimistic about the months ahead.
The cost of goods that are rising and everything else that's coming along, it's hurt all of us, everybody.
There is a sliver of good news. Inflation has fallen slightly to 7.4%, meaning the price for goods and services might have peaked.
At the moment, I don't think anything's stopped just yet, because it doesn't look like anything's slowing down interest rate rise.
Household spending is also slowing, while the rate of household savings has dropped to its lowest level in 5 years. Bill Toscas is seeing the impact of all that firsthand.
We've seen people's daily spend absolutely drop, where we'd get people coming in for 2 coffees a day, a sandwich, a cake, and so on and so forth. They've cut it down now to 1 coffee a day.
So, there is talk that the economy is slowing. Are you worried about what that might mean for the year ahead?
Of course you worry, because I'm a mortgage holder as well.
Rose and her 2 young children have just finished food shopping, which these days requires a bit more budgeting.
We're more conscious of our spending. It's definitely weighing more on our minds now.
Because the family is renting in Sydney while paying a mortgage on a Victorian property, rising interest rates are also a problem.
We're feeling the pinch, and it just feels like it's going up and up and up. Our rent's gone up too.
There's news out that inflation looks like it's peaked. So is that welcome news for you, or are you still worried about the next year or so?
No, I'm still worried because we are thinking of selling our property in Melbourne, and I'm told that we might be looking at a recession. Possibly.
The Australian economy grew by just 0.5% in the December quarter.
Show more signs of a slowdown in the economy than we were expecting.
Felicity Emmett is a senior economist at ANZ.
We're seeing the impact of both very high inflation and also the very sharp lift in interest rates that we've seen over the past year or so flowing through to consumer spending. We are a bit concerned that perhaps the impact of rate hikes is coming through a bit earlier than we previously thought.
Do you think this might influence the RBA next week to not raise interest rates?
Look, I think the strength in inflationary pressures, which is still evident in this report, suggests that we will get another rate hike next week.
But Felicity Emmett thinks cost of living pressures could improve this year.
I think it's a bit early to sort of be worrying too much about recession. I think what it might mean is that we might see the Reserve Bank pause over the next few months to really reassess the data.
Nigeria's opposition Labour Party says it will mount a legal challenge against the presidential election victory of Bola Tinubu and the governing party APC. Mr Tinubu won the presidential elections with 37% of the votes, but the polls that were billed as the most competitive since the country transitioned to democracy have been marred in controversy. The BBC's Mayana Jones is in Lagos, where Mr Tinubu served as governor.
Overjoyed. As results came in overnight, Bola Ahmed Tinubu's supporters gathered at an event in Abuja to celebrate his victory.
I am profoundly humbled that you have elected me to serve as the 16th president of our beloved country. This is a shining moment in the life of any man and affirmation of our democratic existence.
Outside his Lagos home, people are proud of his performance.
He's the Messiah of our time. He's emerged as the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, his will of God. is will of God. So, and I believe he's going to do what Nigerians are expecting him to do for them. They will remember those poor people, or mercy people. I appreciate God on him.
I believe there's much to do, and I believe there's much the president is ready to give to the youth. We're so happy.
Although Bola Ahmed Tinubu is credited with reshaping Lagos during his time as governor, it was Peter Obi of the Labour Party who got the most amount of votes here in Saturday's polls. Mr. Tinubu's detractors say that's because there was widespread corruption during his time in power. An accountant and former pro-democracy activist, Mr. Tinubu was forced into exile in the 90s. He returned as democracy dawned. Nicknamed the Godfather of Lagos, every governor who succeeded him has been one of his protégés. But there are concerns that his health may not be good enough to handle this nation's complex challenges. During the campaign, speculation surrounding his health was so intense, he filed a proof of life video on social media. In Anambra, an opposition stronghold, there's frustration.
Honestly speaking, I'm very hurt because this is not what we expected. After all our efforts, everything just went in vain. This is not the kind of result we all expected.
I don't expect any magic from him because he can't give what he doesn't have.
Let's just postpone the election. Let's go back to vote again. Because this is not the correct result they give to us. And I feel so angry in the way that
Mr. Tinubu has an uphill battle to unite the country and rescue its declining economy. He also has to restore security to large swathes of the nation, which are under the control of armed militants and criminal gangs. It's a tall order.
The Canadian singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell is being awarded the Gershwin Prize, a Lifetime Achievement Award for pop music, handed out by the US Library of Congress. Joni Mitchell rose to fame in the male-dominated folk music scene of the 1960s and 70s. The BBC's Sarah Montague has been talking to one of her superfans, the arts journalist Kat Lister.
Rose and flows of angel hair.
The most magical thing about Joni Mitchell is that you can never quite grasp hold of her. She's almost unknowable, and what actually pulls you into her music and her melodies and her lyricism is the fact that you so desperately want to know more about her.
Okay, so the albums, the first album you'd reach for is what?
I mean, for me it's got to be Blue, and I know that sounds very, very obvious. It's number one in my heart for a reason. She's a master of melody, of rhythm, of lyricism. And when that all comes together, it's like this beautiful pearl.
I would still be on my feet.
Do you think that she is underrated?
I wouldn't say that she is now. I think things have certainly changed. I would say, I'm approaching 40 now. When I was younger, I did lament the fact that she perhaps wasn't celebrated in a similar way, and what I mean by that is she wasn't always very visible to me.
Seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
So, on the front cover of various music monthlies, you would always see Bob Dylan and Neil Young fairly regularly. It was quite unusual to see her.
You pull out Blue. What else would you flag up that to know Joni Mitchell people should listen to?
As I matured and got a little bit older, I was pulled towards some of her later albums. So Hejira for me in later years has been something that I've really been pulled toward.
I looked a coyote right in the face on the road to Beljenny near my old hometown.
Hejira, loosely translated, is a journey, an exodus, and for me it's this wide open freeway that really sort of tapped into her yearning for movement. And don't forget that Joni Mitchell had polio as a child. She really struggled with that in her early years.
So she's winning this award tonight, and a tribute concert with some serious heavyweights there, among them the likes of Annie Lennox. I think she's only the third woman ever to have been granted this award. So it is a sort of recognition of all that you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. It's a long time coming, and perhaps with the health problems that she's we've been experiencing over the last 5 years or so, we've found this new appreciation for her.
Joy and peace, oh, I wish I had a river I could skate away.
Joni Mitchell there, and that was Sarah Montague, BBC journalist, speaking to Kat Lister about Joni Mitchell being awarded the Gershwin Prize. Someone's got in touch about our interview with the Red Cross, Kath, and she says, I think Red Cross should focus on having in stock flat pack homes for shelter. Overseas, these portable wood shelters are pretty high quality and have renewable energy inbuilt beds. They should be able to be stood up in days. Very military, I know, says Kath, but there are going to be more and more of these events, and these could be movable. Can't understand why they're not standing up villages and assistance like this in Auckland as well. Permanent investment, not just paying hoteliers, says Kath. There's an age-old saying that opposites attract, but it appears in the flamingo world, at least, this isn't true. A study of captive flamingos at a wildlife centre in the English county of Gloucestershire has found that birds within the group formed cliques of like-minded individuals. The BBC's Sally Johnson reports.
You probably already know that the collective noun for a group of flamingos is, appropriately enough, a flamboyance. But new research has found that within these garish flocks, there are interesting friendship dynamics at play. Flamingos might all look the same, but they are particular about who they spend their time with. Dr. Paul Rose from the University of Exeter is one of the scientists who studied two captive flamboyances in Gloucestershire.
Flamingos have individual and consistent personality types, and these particular personality types influence the friendships they form within the flocks that they live in. This probably gives them advantages when it comes to nesting and breeding and finding a mate and accessing resources.
The researchers also believe that flamingos carve out different roles within their society based on their personalities and offer support to other members of their group, including in flamingo fights and squabbles, to ensure the birds they hang out with remain very much in the pink.
That is about all we have got time for. But before we go, someone's got in touch about Bailey bridges and is saying Bailey bridges were developed by the British for rapid deployment in warfare. If the combatants took months to deploy them as we are, they would have lost the war. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything, you can find Checkpoint again on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, we'll be joined by a baker whose huge sourdough loaves are being snapped up before they leave the oven, all to raise funds for the victims of Cyclone Gabrielle. Pretty tasty stuff. 5 a.m. tomorrow morning with First Up, and we'll catch you a little later in the day.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, Paul Marie. I'm Evie Ashton. The New Zealand Red Cross says at least $10 million has been donated to support people affected by Cyclone Gabrielle. Aid supplied so far includes generators, fuel, satellite phones and bedding. The Cyclone Recovery Minister says areas of Hawke's Bay are being assessed to see if they're suitable to keep living in. In Tairāwhiti, recent rain has hampered efforts to restore road access to East Coast communities. And protests have erupted in Greece over the rail crash, which has so far killed 43 people. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora, Susie Ferguson here with a question for you. So what do Sir Rod Stewart, the Proclaimers, and 10cc's Graham Goldman all have in common? Well, they're all joining me on Sunday morning, along with Kiwi musician Delaney Davidson. That's Sunday morning from 8 with me, Susie Ferguson, in for Jim Mora on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Hi there, I'm Evie Ashton. It's 29 minutes to 7, which means it's time for Trending Now. Today on The Detail, truancy has hit the headlines. How are schools trying to keep kids in the classroom?
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail.
Our school attendance rates are on the slide and have been exacerbated by COVID-19. In Term 1 last year, fewer than 50% of students regularly attended school.
Education Ministry figures show serious truancy spiked last year. The attendance service dealt with nearly 29,000 cases, not children. 40% or 8,500 more than in 2021.
More than 90,000 children miss 2 or 3 weeks of class each term.
More kids are missing more school, and the government's stepping in.
Hot off the press this morning, the government has just announced a $74 million package, including 82 new attendance officers to get kids back to school.
They have a slightly different focus to what we've known attendance officers to have in the past. They will be working with the young people who are at risk of chronic attendance, so those who have moderate attendance rates at the moment, and we want them to stop that falling attendance in that group of young people.
But is it the answer?
There's already opposition, one principal saying he has no faith in the approach to truancy.
I heard the words truancy officers and attendance services, and they've never worked and they never will work.
What we got today was a knee-jerk scrambled response to a very bad statistic, rather than the comprehensive package that we need that empowers schools to make decisions based on the needs of their community.
So why are school attendance rates dropping, and what's the best way to turn them around? Jace Williams is a principal of Henry Hills School in Napier, and he deals with these issues every day.
We've done really well as far as attendance goes. Historically, we kind of sit around anywhere between 90 and 92% for a school from a low socioeconomic area, but definitely noticed the difference in the past 18 months to 2 years where that percentage has dropped quite a bit.
Can you just set me the scene? Tell me about your school, where you're at, what kind of students come to your school?
We have around 78% Māori, about 10% Pasifika, about 10% New Zealand European, and 2% other ethnicities, mostly Asian. And a community can be a very tough place to grow up and live. Our school is physically located in Onekawa. However, out the back gate of our school, if you walk through that back gate, you're in the suburb of Pirimai. So we're in the middle of two suburbs, but the majority of our children come from Maraenui. So Maraenui is a very young suburb, so it has a median age of around 27, so very young families. It's a very poor suburb with median income per adult of just over $20,000 per annum. High levels of physical and violent harm incidents are recorded there. The majority of those happen during daylight hours. So again, that's the community that our kids come from. A number of our whānau at our school are connected to the mongrel mob. It's historical. They've been in our community for a long time. There's a real lack of trust in the system. And when I say system, I'm talking about governments, I'm talking about Ministry of Social Development, Oranga Tamariki, New Zealand Police. And that just comes from years of intergenerational trauma, I guess, that's been transmitted and passed on. And everything just appears to be another layer on top of. So when COVID hit a couple of years ago, that was just another layer that a community had to deal with on top of all the other stuff they deal with. And then with the flooding in 2020.
A local state of emergency was declared last night after extreme flooding swept through the city.
That destroyed 3/4 of the buildings at our school. That was another layer. And now with the cyclone a couple of weeks ago.
It's hard to comprehend the devastation caused by Cyclone Gabrielle across Hawke's Bay. Thousands are displaced and whānau are struggling to reconnect with loved ones as power, internet and cell phone service are still patchy for many.
That just adds another layer.
How do you actually measure attendance?
Obviously, you have to physically be here to attend. Attendance is taken before 9:15 every morning. So at 9:15, we already have a gauge of who's here and who's not. And then our office admin spends considerable time tracking down those children who aren't here, just from a health and safety perspective, because if they're not here, then where are they? So that's how we track the attendance. And that attendance then goes into a system that is linked in with the Ministry of Education, so they can also monitor and pull out data from that system.
Is there a kind of threshold, like what counts as regular attendance at schools?
Yeah, I believe it's 90% of 90%. So if a child attends 90% of 90% of the days, it's something like that. But 90% is literally one day away every fortnight.
Right, and that's not ideal, is it?
Yeah, in a 40-week school year for primaries, that's 20 days. 20 days is literally 4 weeks of school. It's almost half a term missed learning. It's a lot of learning.
Right, okay. So you said that a few years ago or recently your rates were sitting about 90, 92%. Have you seen that drop off in recent years, have you?
Yeah, it's dropped off in the last year by about 8 or 9%. which is quite considerable, really, considering we've stuck over that 90% for my entire tenure here, which is over 10 years. So to drop below 90% is quite a big deal. And it dropped once COVID hit. I mean, we started last year in 2022. We started the school year with half our school wearing masks. So it was our older children and all our staff. And that directive came down, I think, only a day or two before school went back in February.
Well, many schools and kura across the motu are starting back for the year today. Staff are battling how to enforce mask mandates and are dealing with a tsunami of information on how to cope with Omicron creeping into the community.
So that was a big change. So with those kind of changes, you start bringing in, like I said earlier, for a community that already has a lack of trust in the system, you know, people started being heavily influenced in our community by social media. You know, whereas you and I perhaps gather our information from, you know, TV news and newspapers and the radio, a lot of our community information comes via places like Facebook. So if someone, like a stranger, posts something on Facebook and they connect with it on a social and emotional level, that becomes fact. Whether it's fact or not, it becomes reality for that whānau. And then they're likely to share that post with other whānau who also probably don't get information the way you and I do. And then it just becomes like this bush telegraph that goes around the community. I mean, the worst one we saw was last year. There was a rumour going around that it got shared in lots of schools across the country that schools have the authority to inject your children with the vaccine. And that went across lots of places that, you know, we can use like the police or army to enforce it, and we don't have to tell whānau. So ridiculous things like that become fact when they start to get spread through social media. So social media, I believe, has quite a big impact on that bigger picture of attendance.
Let's get a perspective from Northland, which has had some of the lowest attendance rates in the country. In Term 1 last year, only a third of students were regularly in class. Patsy Henderson-Watts leads the Miriam Centre in Whangarei, a counselling service helping tamariki and rangatahi all over Northland. In her words, she works with everything sad. When you say that you work in the field of everything sad, I do have to ask, what do you mean? What is everything sad?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit of a... it's actually a lovely job. It's a fun job. It's a great job, or I wouldn't stay. We work with the downstream behaviours of situations of disadvantage and poverty and disaffection and alienation and everything where people are left out.
What are some of the reasons that kids you've worked with, what are some of the reasons they don't want to go to school, they don't go to school?
I do think, start with COVID, has made a big difference because we all got out of the habit of getting up and going to work or working from home or not going to school. And so, and getting jobs in that time, low-paid jobs, is to help with the family. So that is quite a big reason. I think that's probably compounded what was already happening and made it more widespread problem.
Things like uniforms can also be a barrier for children attending school.
Uniforms are just so expensive. I have no idea why we just don't let people go to the wariwhare and get a $5 T-shirt and a pair of black jeans, you know. But school uniforms at the beginning of a term are a horrendous price. And families get into debt with WINs because they have to borrow to buy the school uniforms. Now, you know, wouldn't it be sensible to not have to pay $56 for something or other? Or have to, you know, why do we all have to look the same? I think there's so many things that keep kids out of school. And that's why we need to sit down as a community, small communities, and we need to look at, okay, what do our kids need to thrive? That's the question. We don't need really any more thinking about it or talking about why do people truant. We know a million reasons. Anybody can work it out. But what we know is what is the solution? And the solution is, it's like the solution to youth crime. What's the solution to that? It's getting these kids, finding out what makes them tick, finding out what's wrong, and sticking in there with them until they're proud and they're doing okay. And often that's in the family, and it's in housing, and it's in food. We provide food frequently.